Let me tell you about the most worthless thing I ever owned. It sat in my yard for 11 years. A slab of dull gray metal, about the size of a kitchen table, dented on one corner. I tripped over it almost every morning. I cursed it more times than I can count. And every dealer who came through Brindle Flats took one look at it and laughed in my face. "That's dead plate," they'd say. "Nobody buys dead plate." I almost gave it away once, for free, to a kid who wanted to build a ramp for his hoverskiff. The only reason I didn't is because we couldn't cut it. 11 years that slab sat there. And then one cold morning, 3 ships came down out of the sky to take it from me, and they brought soldiers to do it. So let me start at the beginning. Let me tell it right. My name is Orrin Dackett. I ran a salvage yard on a colony moon called Saffron out past the Loop, which is what we called the edge of the map territory back then. If you've never been to a place like Saffron, picture this. Red dust that gets into everything. 2 small suns that never quite manage to feel warm. A sky the color of weak tea. And junk everywhere. That was the whole point of Saffron, see? It was a dump moon. For 200 years, the bigger world shipped their dead ships and broken machines out to us, and we picked them apart for whatever was worth picking. Hull steel, wiring, reactor cores if we were lucky. We weren't a rich people. We were the kind of people who made a living off other people's garbage, and we knew it, and we didn't complain much. I grew up in that yard. My father ran it before me, and his mother before him. I learned to read off the side of a busted cargo crate. I learned to count by sorting bolts. By the time I was a grown man with a bad knee and a worse temper, I knew metal the way some men know horses. I could tell you the grade of a hull plate by the sound it made when I knocked on it. I could smell when a wreck still had fuel in the lines. So when I tell you that slab in my yard confused me, you should understand. I am not a man who is easily confused by metal. It came in on a bulk hauler about 11 years before the soldiers showed up. Big anonymous shipment from a demolition contractor 3 systems over. They'd torn down some old derelict floating out in the dark and sold the pieces by weight. Most of it was ordinary. Steel, ceramic, the usual. But mixed in with the load were maybe 2 dozen of these gray slabs, and right from the start, they weren't right. First thing I noticed was the weight. They were heavy. Not impossibly heavy, but wrong heavy, like they had more inside them than a slab that size should hold. When I ran the loader under one and lifted it, the machine groaned in a way it didn't groan for anything else. Second thing was the color, gray, sure, but it was a gray that didn't reflect. You'd shine a lamp at it and the light would just sort of sink in, like the metal was drinking it. No shine, no shadow, nothing. Just flat gray that made your eyes feel tired if you stared too long. And the third thing, the thing that mattered, was that we couldn't do a single useful thing with it. You have to understand, my whole trade is breaking things down. A salvage yard that can't break metal down is just a field full of trash. So when those slabs came in, I did what I always did. I rolled the first one onto the cutting bed and fired up the plasma torch. The torch was a good one. It could open a battleship hull like a tin of fish. I'd cut through plate that the manufacturer swore was uncuttable. I brought that torch down on the gray slab full power and held it there. Nothing. Not a scorch mark. Not a glow. Not even any heat coming back up the handle, which is the part that still gives me the chills when I think about it. Because heat has to go somewhere. That's a law. You pour that much energy into something, it gets hot, or it melts, or it reflects the heat back at you. This thing did none of that. The torch fired just, touched it and disappeared, like I was trying to cut a hole in the night sky. I ran that torch on the slab for a full hour. My foreman, a stubborn old woman named Pell who'd worked the yard longer than I'd been alive, came over to watch. "Turn it off, Orrin," she said finally. "You're wasting gas." "It's not even warm, Pell." She put her bare hand on the slab, which I'd have told her not to do, except by then I knew it wasn't going to burn her, and she frowned. She was quiet for a long while. "That's not from around here," she said. And that was the most accurate thing anyone said about it for the next 11 years. We tried everything those first few weeks. Curiosity does that to people in my trade. A puzzle this strange, we couldn't leave it alone. We tried the industrial saw, snapped 3 blades. We tried acid. The good stuff, the kind that eats through reactor shielding. It just ran off the surface like rain off a window and pooled on the floor and ate a hole in my concrete instead. Cost me a fortune to repair. We tried freezing it, then hitting it with a hammer, an old trick for brittle alloys. The hammer bounced so hard it nearly took my apprentice's teeth out. We tried the scanner. This is the part that started to bother me looking back. We had a decent old material scanner in the office, the kind that tells you what an alloy is made of so you know what it's worth. Every dealer has one. I pressed it against the slab, pulled the trigger, and the little screen flickered and went blank. I thought it was broken. I tested it on a piece of ordinary hull steel, worked fine, pressed it back on the gray slab, blank again. It wasn't broken. The scanner simply had nothing to say. The composition of that metal wasn't in its database, and the database had every known material in charted space loaded into it. Every single one. I want you to sit with that for a second, because at the time I didn't. At the time I just shrugged and figured it was some old experimental junk from before the standards were set, some forgotten alloy from the early colony days. I was a busy man. I had a yard to run. A mystery slab that wouldn't cut and wouldn't scan was, to me, just an annoying piece of trash taking up space. So I dragged the slabs to the back corner of the lot, behind the scrap heap, where the rain pooled and nothing useful ever went. I sold off the rest of that demolition load and made my money on the ordinary steel, and I forgot about the gray slabs. Mostly. Over the years I sold a few of them off when traders passed through and got curious. Always cheap. Always at a loss, basically, because there's no buyer for a metal nobody can identify or use. A novelty collector took 2. A university research team took 3 for study, never heard a word back, which I should have thought harder about. A scrap dealer from the inner worlds took a handful, swearing he had a buyer, and then he just never came back and never paid. I figured I'd been cheated. I added it to the long list of times I'd been cheated, and I let it go. By the end, I had just the one slab left, the big one with the dented corner. It lived by my office door because I'd long since stopped having the energy to move it anywhere. I leaned my tools against it. My dog slept on it in the summer because it stayed cool. I used it as a workbench when I was repairing small things, and the funny thing is, no matter how hard I hammered on it, it never marked. 11 years of abuse and that slab looked exactly the way it did the day it came off the hauler. I'd stopped seeing it the way you stop seeing anything that's always there. It was just part of the yard, just junk metal. I had no idea what it was. None of us did. But somebody somewhere out in the dark, they knew, and they were coming. The first sign that anything was wrong came about 2 weeks before the ships landed. It was a quiet thing, easy to miss. A man came through the yard, not a trader, though he dressed like one. Traders on Saffron had a certain look, dusty, tired, always doing math behind their eyes. This man was clean, too clean for our moon. His boots didn't have a speck of red dust on them, and on Saffron, that's nearly impossible. You walk from the landing pad to my gate and you've got dust to your knees. He walked through my lot slow, looking at everything, touching nothing. I clocked him as a buyer and went over to do my pitch. He waved me off polite enough, said he was just looking. He had an accent I couldn't place, and on a dump moon at the edge of charted space, I'd heard just about every accent there is. He stopped at the gray slab by my door. He stood there a long time, longer than anyone had ever stood at that slab. He crouched down next to it, and he reached out and laid 2 fingers on the dented corner, very gentle, like you'd touch the face of someone sleeping. And his expression, I'll never forget it. It wasn't a buyer's expression. It wasn't greed or curiosity or that calculating look traders get. It was something closer to grief. "Where did this come from?" he asked, quiet, not looking at me. "Demolition load," I said. "Years back, some old wreck out past the loop. Why, you a collector?" He stood up. He looked at me for a moment, and there was something in his eyes that made the back of my neck go cold for no reason I could name. "You should sell it," he said. "Soon, to anyone who offers, take the first price. Do you understand me? It's not worth anything, friend. Nobody can cut it. Nobody can. Take the first price," he said again. And then he walked out of my yard, and he got in a small, unmarked shuttle that I hadn't even seen land, and he left. I stood there feeling stupid and uneasy. I told Pell about it that night over dinner. She'd known me 40 years, and she was the only person whose opinion I trusted more than my own. "He told you to sell it," she said slowly. "Cheap fast to anyone." She set down her fork. She was quiet, the way she got quiet when she was about to say something she didn't want to. "Oren," she said, "when somebody who knows more than you tells you to get rid of something fast, they're not warning you about the thing. They're warning you about who's coming for it." I laughed it off. "I want to be honest with you about that." I laughed, and I poured another drink, and I said something about jumpy off-worlders, and we changed the subject. But that night I didn't sleep well. And the next morning, the first thing I did when I got to the yard was walk over to that gray slab and look at it. Really look at it, for the first time in years. And for the first time, leaning close, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Faint, almost worn away, pressed into the metal near the dented corner markings. Not scratches, not damage, deliberate marks. A row of symbols, alien, nothing like any alphabet I'd ever seen, partly worn smooth by however many centuries this thing had spent floating in the dark before it ever reached me. I'd had this slab 11 years, and I had never once noticed it had writing on it. I ran my thumb over the symbols. They were cool. They were precise. They had been made by someone or something with a purpose. And I had been using it as a workbench. The ships came 11 days later. It was early. The two little suns were just clearing the eastern slag ridge, and the yard was that cold blue color it gets right before the dust warms up. I was alone except for Pell, who was in the office going over the books, and my dog, who was asleep on the slab. I heard them before I saw them. A sound I'd never heard, and I've heard a lot of engines. This wasn't an engine. It was a low note, almost too deep to hear, that I felt in my back teeth and in the floor under my boots before I felt it anywhere else. The kind of sound that makes animals run. My dog was up and pressed against my leg, shaking before I even looked up. 3 ships came down through the weak tea sky. They were not our kind of ships. Colony ships are ugly, practical things, all welds and patches. These were smooth and dark, and they moved wrong, too quiet, too steady. No wobble, no exhaust I could see. They came down over my yard and just stopped in the air, hanging there, and the dust didn't even rise the way it should have under landing thrust. Like the ground itself had agreed to hold still for them. 2 of them stayed up. The third came down and settled, soundless, onto the open ground past my gate, crushing a stack of scrap flat under it without seeming to notice. A door opened in the side of it. Light spilled out, too white, too clean. And the soldiers came down the ramp. I'd seen aliens before. Saffron was at the edge of the Accord. That's what they called the big galactic body that ran things out beyond our little human cluster, the Accord. A whole council of species older and richer and grander than us. We'd been allowed to join it about 60 years back, and allowed is the right word, because they made it clear it was a favor. Humans were new. Humans were small. Humans got the dump moons and the edge worlds and the seat at the very back of the room. So yeah, I'd seen Accord species pass through. Tall, thin ones, squat, armored ones, the occasional swirl of gas in a containment suit. I knew aliens. But I had never seen soldiers like these. They were tall, a head and a half taller than me, and I'm not a small man. Lean, armored in that same drinking gray color which I noticed and filed away without understanding yet. They moved in a way that made every hair on my body stand up, perfectly together. Not marching, predators don't march, but flowing like one creature with 12 bodies. Their faces, behind the visors, I couldn't see. I was glad I couldn't. There were 12 of them, and at the front, one without a helmet. That one I could see. Long gray face, no nose to speak of, 2 eyes set wide and dark and wet. And a mouth that didn't look built for human speech, but managed it anyway, through a device at its throat that turned the clicks and hisses into words I could understand. This installation, it said, is the property registration of Oren Dackett, salvage license 441. Is this correct? It wasn't really a question. They knew exactly who I was. My mouth was dry. Pell had come out of the office and was standing in the doorway, very still. "That's me," I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. The tall one tilted its head. Its eyes moved past me, across the yard, over the heaps of scrap and the broken ships and the rust, and then they stopped. Locked. Fixed on one thing with a focus so total that I felt it like a physical thing in the air. It was looking at the gray slab by my door. It said something to the soldiers behind it in its own language, quick and low, and every one of those 12 armored heads turned at the same instant to look at the same place. At my workbench, at my dog's summer bed, at the worthless slab of dead plate I'd nearly given to a kid to build a ramp. And the tall one looked back at me, and when it spoke again, there was something different in the flat, translated voice, something I didn't have a name for yet. "You will explain to me," it said slowly, "how a creature of your kind came to possess the hull of a Veshran warship." I didn't know what a Veshran was. I'd never heard the word in my life. But Pell had. I heard her breath catch behind me, sharp in the doorway. And that's where I have to leave it, friends, right there, on that cold blue morning, with 12 soldiers in my yard and a word in the air that even old Pell, who knew everything, had gone white to hear. Because what came next is the part nobody believes when I tell it, the part about what the Veshran were, the part about why 3 ships and 12 soldiers came all this way for a slab of junk, and the part about what we humans did when they tried to take it. I told you Pell went white when she heard the word. Veshran. I didn't know it, but she did. And I learned later that everyone old enough, everyone who'd really paid attention during the early days of the Accord, knew it too. It just wasn't a word people said out loud. It was the kind of word that the big species used in low voices, the way you'd talk about a fire that had once burned your whole town down, not a thing you brought up at dinner. So I'm standing in my own yard, the cold blue morning going pale around me, 12 gray soldiers flowing into formation, my dog pressed so hard against my leg I could feel his heart going. And the tall one without a helmet is staring at me, waiting for me to explain how a creature like me came to own the hull of a Veshran warship. And all I could say was the truth. "I bought it," I said, "in a load by weight. 11 years ago I didn't know what it was. Nobody did, we couldn't even cut it." The commander, that's what it was. I understood that much from how the others moved around it, went very still. Then it did something I didn't expect. It turned to its soldiers and made a single low sound, and all 12 of them stepped back. Just one step, but it changed the whole air of the place, like something had been switched off. It walked toward me, slow. It stopped at the slab and it crouched beside it the same way the clean man had 11 days before, 2 fingers on the dented corner, on those worn smooth markings I'd never noticed in all my years. When it spoke again, the translation box made the words flat, but I could hear something underneath, a roughness in the original, a shaking. "Do you know what these are?" it asked. "No," I said. "They are names," it said, "of the dead." Here is what Pell told me later, and what the commander told me there in pieces, over the longest hour of my life. I'll give it to you straight, the way I finally understood it. The Veshran were a people, not a weapon, not a monster, a people like us, like the Accord species, a whole civilization that had lived out past the far edge, in the dark beyond even the dump moons. long before humans ever crawled off our own dirt and looked up. And about 300 years ago, the Accord went to war with them. I never got the whole why of it. The Accord told the story one way: border disputes, broken treaties, the Veshran painted as aggressors. The commander told it another way, quieter, and I believe the quiet version more because nobody tells a comfortable lie in a voice like that. The way the commander told it, the Veshran had simply been in the way. They'd had something the Accord wanted: territory, resources, a passage through the dark. And the Accord was old and grand and certain of its own rightness, the way old and grand things always are. So the Accord built a fleet and they ended the Veshran. Not defeated, ended. The commander used a word the box couldn't translate, and then it gave up and just said, "There are 9 of us left, in all the turning of all the stars. 9. 9. And the warships, the great Veshran warships, the pride of a whole vanished people, the Accord had stripped them and broken them and scattered the pieces across the dark, deliberately, so that nothing would remain to remember them by, so that even the metal would be lost. The hull of a Veshran ship was made of something the galaxy had never managed to copy: drinks light, won't cut, won't scan. The Accord couldn't reproduce it, and they couldn't bear for anyone else to have it, so they threw it away. Threw it away. Into demolition loads, into bulk shipments sold by weight, out to the dump moons at the edge of charted space, where the small, new, ugly species picked through the garbage of their betters. Out to Saffron. Out to me. And for 11 years, the last hull plate of a murdered people, a slab carved with the names of their dead, a thing 9 survivors had spent 3 centuries searching the scattered dark to find, sat by my office door, and I leaned my tools against it, and my dog slept on it in the summer. I felt sick. I want you to know that. I'm a salvage man. I've torn apart 1,000 dead ships and never thought twice, because a dead ship is just metal. But I stood there in my yard that morning and I felt sick all the way down because I understood, finally, that I'd been using a gravestone for a workbench. I didn't know, I said. It sounded so small. I swear to you I didn't know. The commander looked at me with those wide, wet, dark eyes. No, it said. You didn't. That is the cruelty of it. Your kind were not even told. And then 3 more ships came down out of the sky. I felt them before I saw them, the same way as the first, that deep note in the back teeth, but these were different, sharper, angrier. And the moment the Veshran commander heard them, every soldier in my yard moved at once, dropping low, weapons up, turning outward toward the new arrivals in a single liquid motion. And I understood without being told that these new ships were not friends. They were Accord. I knew their markings. Everyone on the edge worlds knew the markings of the Accord patrol. Sleek, white, gold trim, the symbol of the council on the flank. The ships of the people who ran things. The people who'd built the seat at the back of the room and put us in it. The people who had, 300 years ago, ended a civilization and thrown its bones out to my moon. They'd come because someone had told them the Veshran were here. I found out later it was the university research team, or the scrap dealer, or maybe all of them. Somebody who'd recognized what those gray slabs were and reported it, the way you're supposed to, because the Accord kept a quiet standing order. Any Veshran remnant found is to be confiscated and destroyed. 300 years on, and they were still making sure nothing remained. They'd come to take the last hull, to finish it, and the 9 survivors had come to save it. And it was all happening in my yard. An Accord officer came down out of the white ship, tall, polished, draped in the kind of soft, expensive cloth that's never touched dust in its life. It looked at the Veshran soldiers with a flat distaste, the way you'd look at vermin in a clean kitchen. And it looked at me, at the human, the salvage rat, the small thing with even less. Salvage operator, it said, not even bothering with my name. You are in possession of contraband material. Under Accord remnant statute it is forfeit. Stand aside. This matter does not concern your kind. And here is the thing, here is the moment. I should have stood aside. any sensible man would have. I'm one human with a bad knee on a dump moon with no weapon between two alien fleets over a slab of metal I'd nearly given away for free. But I just learned what it was. I just learned that for 300 years, the Grand and the Certain had hunted down the bones of the dead to grind them into nothing, so that not one name would survive. And 9 of those people had crossed the whole turning dark to find one slab, to find their gravestone, to take it home. And the polished thing in the clean cloth had just told me it didn't concern my kind. No, I said. The Accord officer paused. I don't think anyone had said no to it in a very long time. No. It's in my yard, I said. My voice was shaking, but it didn't stop. On my license, on my moon. You sold it to me by weight like garbage. You threw it away, and now you want me to stand aside so you can throw it away again. I put my hand on the slab, on the worn names of a people I'd never met. It came to me as junk, but I know what it is now, and you don't get to finish what you started, not in my yard, not today. Pell came and stood beside me. Old Pell, who told me 40 years' worth of hard, true things. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand on the slab next to mine. And then, and this is the part I still can't tell without my throat going tight, the gate of my yard creaked, and people started coming in. Word travels fast on a small moon. The whole of Brindle Flats had heard the ships, and they came, my apprentice. The kid who'd wanted the slab for a ramp grown into a young man now. The other salvage families. The man who ran the fuel depot. The old women from the market. 20 of them, then 40, then more ordinary humans, dump moon humans, the small back-of-the-room humans, walking into my yard and standing between the Accord and the slab, putting their hands on it. Or just standing there, empty-handed, looking up at the polished officer with the same plain stubbornness I'd grown up surrounded by. We didn't have weapons. We had junk and bad knees and each other. The Accord officer looked at us. 40, 50, 60 humans growing by the minute, standing over a gravestone that wasn't even ours, for a people we'd never known, against a power that could have flattened the whole moon. And the 9 Veshran soldiers, the last 9 in all the turning of all the stars, turned away from us. They lowered their weapons, and they faced the Accord, standing with us, or maybe we were standing with them. I've never been sure it matters which. I'd like to tell you there was a great battle. There wasn't. The Accord officer stood there a long moment, doing the math behind its polished face. And the math didn't work. Because here's the thing about the Grand and the Certain. They only act when no one is watching. The Veshran had been ended in the dark, quietly, where no story could escape. But this was a yard full of witnesses now, on a moon at the edge of charted space, and word was already going up the comm relays. And the one thing a council like the Accord cannot survive is a story. A story about the day they came to destroy the last grave of a people they'd murdered. And a crowd of the galaxy's smallest, poorest, newest species stood in front of it and said no. The officer looked at us for a long time. Then it turned and it went back up the ramp, and the white ships rose into the pale sky and were gone. And they never came back. Not for the slab. Not for any of it. The Veshran commander came to me before they left. It stood in front of me and it did something with one long gray hand, laid it flat against its own chest, then held it out toward me, palm up. I didn't know what it meant. I still half don't, but I put my hand against it anyway. Your kind are new, it said. You are small. The galaxy does not yet know what you are. It looked around my dusty yard at my neighbors at the slab. We know. I asked it, I had to ask it, do you want it? It's yours, it always was, take it home. And the commander looked at the slab a long time. The worn names, the dented corner, 11 years on a dump moon. It was lost, it said softly, and it was found, and it was kept safe without even knowing why by hands that owed us nothing. It folded those long fingers closed. It is already home, salvage man. Let it rest here, among the ones who would not let it be thrown away twice. And then the 9 of them went up into their dark, silent ships, and they rose into the tea-colored sky, and they were gone. The slab is still in my yard, by the office door where it always was. We built a low rail around it now, cleaned the dust off the markings. The kid, the grown one, keeps it polished. Sometimes traders come through and ask about it, and we tell them the story, and most of them don't believe it. That's fine. I wouldn't have believed it either before. I still don't fully understand what I was part of that morning. I'm just a salvage man. I read off the side of a cargo crate, and I count by sorting bolts, and I know metal by the sound it makes when I knock on it. But I know this much now. The galaxy is very old and very grand, and very certain that it knows the worth of things. It looked at the bones of a murdered people and called them garbage. It looked at us and called us small. It is wrong about both in the same way for the same reason. Because worth isn't in the grand thing, or the certain thing, or the thing that throws the others away. It's in whoever bothers to bend down and pick up the thing that everyone laughed at, and refuse with their plain, stubborn, empty hands, to let it be thrown away a second time. They called it junk metal. We called it ours. And in the end, that was the same thing as calling it sacred.